Hello, friends, this is the third part of the video. Enjoy the video. The next day, Matt and the others rallied around me like a squad preparing for battle. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about sending a message not only to Kyle and his crew but to everyone who thought they could get away with treating people like dirt. We planned everything carefully. Amber and Chris were the brains of the operation, mapping out when Kyle and his crew would be hanging out at their usual spot behind the football field. Devin, who rarely spoke but always seemed to have a plan, suggested we corner them when they were alone. It was all set to go down on Monday after school. By the time the day arrived, I felt a strange mix of dread and excitement. I was still sore from the beating, but the fire in my chest burned brighter than the pain. Matt drove us to the field in his old pickup truck, and we parked far enough away that Kyle wouldn't see us coming. As we approached, I could hear their laughter, Kyle, Marcus, Jared, and Tony, talking trash like they owned the world. Chris cracked his knuckles. "Ready?" he asked. I nodded. We stepped out of the shadows, and their laughter died instantly. Kyle's eyes narrowed as he saw us. "What's this?" he said, his tone mocking. "You brought backup, Ryan? How cute." Matt stepped forward, his presence commanding. "You guys have been pushing people around for too long. It ends now." Jared snorted. "What are you gonna do? Call the cops?" "No," I said, stepping up beside Matt. "We're here to settle this our way." Kyle smirked. "You want a fight? Fine. But don't start crying when you lose." They moved in, but this time, I wasn't afraid. The Fight Club training kicked in like muscle memory. Kyle threw the first punch, wild and predictable, and I ducked under it, landing a clean jab to his ribs. Matt took on Marcus, while Chris and Devin squared off against Jared and Tony. Amber hung back, ready to step in if things got out of hand, but she didn't need to. For the first time, it was a fair fight. And we won. By the end, Kyle and his crew were on the ground, bruised and panting. I stood over Kyle, my fists clenched, my breath coming in short gasps. "Apologize," I said, my voice steady. Kyle glared at me, his jaw tight. "Say it." Matt barked. Kyle hesitated, then muttered, "I'm sorry." "Louder," I demanded. "I'm sorry," he shouted, his voice cracking. It wasn't much, but it was enough. As we walked away, Matt clapped me on the back. "You did good, man," he said. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't just surviving, I was winning. The days following the confrontation were surreal. At school, Kyle and his crew didn't so much as look in my direction. Word must have gotten around because people who used to ignore me now gave me nods in the hallway, like I'd earned some kind of respect. Emily even stopped me outside of history class one day. "I heard what happened," she said, her voice low. "Are you okay?" "Yeah," I replied, trying to sound casual. "I'm fine." She smiled, and for a moment, I forgot about everything else. "Well, I'm glad you stood up for yourself. They deserved it." Her words made me feel like I was floating. At Fight Club, Greg gave me a knowing look when I walked in. "Heard you had a busy afternoon," he said. "How's it feel?" I shrugged, but inside, I felt like a champion. But things didn't stay peaceful for long. It started small whispers in the hallways, sideways glances from people I didn't know. I figured it was just gossip about the fight, but something about it felt off. Then one day, I found a note stuffed into my locker. "You think you've won, but this isn't over. Watch your back." My stomach twisted as I read it. I didn't recognize the handwriting, and there was no name, but I knew who it was from. That afternoon, I showed the note to Matt. "They're not gonna let this go," I said. "Of course not," he replied, his expression serious. "Guys like that don't like losing. But they'll think twice before trying anything stupid." I wanted to believe him, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something worse was coming. Sure enough, the next day, my locker was vandalized. Someone had spray-painted the word loser across it in bright red letters. As I stood there, staring at the mess, a group of students walked by, laughing and whispering. I clenched my fists, my anger boiling over. I was done playing their games. At Fight Club that evening, I trained harder than ever. Greg and Matt noticed the change in me, the way I pushed myself past my limits, the way I hit the bag like it owed me something. "You're angry," Greg said after class. "That's good. But don't let it control you." His words stuck with me. I didn't want to become like Kyle, using anger to hurt people. But I also wasn't going to let anyone walk all over me ever again. Things escalated quickly after the note and the vandalized locker. Kyle and his crew might have been lying low, but someone else was clearly pulling strings behind the scenes. It was subtle at first. My backpack went missing during gym class one day, and when I finally found it in the janitor's closet, all my books were soaked in some foul-smelling liquid. A few days later, someone keyed coward into the side of my dad's car while it was parked outside our house. I didn't want to believe it was Kyle, he didn't seem clever enough to orchestrate something this petty, but I couldn't think of anyone else who hated me this much. Then came the setup. I was sitting in chemistry class, zoning out while Mr. Daniels droned on about covalent bonds, when the principal's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ryan Taylor, please report to the main office immediately." My classmates erupted in whispers and side glances as I gathered my stuff and trudged to the office. When I got there, Principal Andrews was waiting for me, arms crossed and a frown etched deep into her face. "We need to talk," she said, gesturing for me to sit. On the desk in front of her was my history notebook, or at least, what looked like my notebook. The cover had my name scrawled across it in Sharpie, but when she opened it, the pages were covered in obscene drawings and crude messages about teachers and students. "This was found in your locker," she said, her tone icy. I froze. "That's not mine," I said quickly. She raised an eyebrow. "Ryan, it has your name on it." "Yeah, but I didn't write any of that," I stammered. Principal Andrews leaned back in her chair, studying me. "You've had some disciplinary issues lately." "The fight behind the football field, for one." "That wasn't a fight," I protested. "That was self-defense." She didn't look convinced. "Regardless, this kind of behavior won't be tolerated. You're suspended for a week. Use the time to reflect on your choices." I sat there, stunned, as the words sank in. Suspended? For something I didn't even do? As I left the office, clutching the slip of paper with my suspension dates, I spotted Kyle leaning against the lockers down the hall. He gave me a slow, mocking clap, a grin spreading across his face. "That was you," I hissed, my fists clenching. He shrugged. "Prove it." I wanted to lunge at him, to knock that smirk off his face, but I knew it wouldn't do any good. He'd won this round, and he knew it. Back at Fight Club that night, I told Matt and the others what had happened. "They're trying to break you," Amber said, her eyes blazing with anger. "Don't let them." Devin, who rarely spoke, leaned forward. "You need to be smart about this," he said. "They want you to react. Don't give them the satisfaction." But the damage was already done. My reputation at school was in shambles, my parents were furious, and worst of all, I felt like I was losing control again. For the first time in weeks, I doubted whether I could come back from this. The suspension was worse than I imagined. My parents barely spoke to me the first couple of days, their disappointment hanging in the air like a thick fog. "We didn't raise you to act like this," my dad said at dinner one night, shaking his head. I didn't do it, I insisted for the 100th time, but they didn't believe me. Or maybe they just didn't know how to process what was happening. With nothing to distract me, the days felt endless. I couldn't train at Fight Club. Greg had a strict no suspensions policy for members, and I didn't want to risk getting kicked out. I stayed in my room most of the time, replaying everything that had happened, wondering where I went wrong. By the time the suspension ended, I felt like a shell of myself. Returning to school was no better. The whispers followed me everywhere, and people avoided me like I had a contagious disease. Even Emily, who'd always been kind, seemed distant. "I heard about what happened," she said when I tried to talk to her after class. "Look, I don't know what's true, but I think it's best if we don't hang out anymore." Her words hit me harder than any punch Kyle had ever thrown. That night, I didn't go to Fight Club. Instead, I walked aimlessly through the neighborhood, my thoughts spiraling. The anger, the humiliation, the hopelessness, it all felt too big, too heavy to carry anymore. Eventually, I found myself standing on the edge of an overpass, looking down at the cars speeding by below. The thought crossed my mind, what if I just let go? What if I didn't have to feel like this anymore? But then I remembered Matt's words, you've got to fight back. Not just against Kyle. Not just against the rumors. Against everything trying to break me. I stepped back from the edge, my heart pounding. The next morning, I showed up at the warehouse before the sun even rose. Greg was unlocking the doors when he saw me. "Ryan," he said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" "I need to train," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "I need to get stronger." He didn't ask any questions. He just nodded and opened the door. For the next few hours, I poured everything I had into the bag, every ounce of anger, every tear I'd been holding back, every piece of doubt and fear. When I finally stopped, my knuckles were raw, and my arms felt like jelly, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of clarity. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Thank you very much for watching. Please support me by subscribing with a like and of course write a comment. Thank you and see you in another video.